Hello everyone and welcome to another video. On the 6th of December 1989, the original series of Doctor Who came to an end, with the third and final part of Season 26's Survival. For the next 16 years, Doctor Who would be almost completely off the air, with only sporadic attempts at a revival. This all changed on the 26th of March 2005, when the show finally came back with the episode Rose. Russell T Davies became the showrunner, with Christopher Eccleston as the 9th Doctor and Billie Piper as the titular companion, Rose Tyler. But what if things had gone differently? What if Doctor Who hadn't been cancelled in 1989? That's something which many fans have pondered about for over 30 years, and now here's my take on it. I'll be using sources such as interviews with people like Sylvester McCoy, Sophie Aldred, John Nathan Turner, Andrew Cartmel and Ben Aronovich. Other sources include the documentary Doctor Who Endgame, released on the Survival DVD release, and issue 255 of Doctor Who magazine. And I'll also use other fans' videos as inspiration, including Hoot Studios' excellent video, as well as the Doctor Who fans' brilliant series, but still respecting his guidelines of course. So without further ado, let's journey back to the year 1990. Chapter 1, Season 27 Recap. Now obviously this isn't the first video in my What If 90 series. Last time we took a look at Season 27, which saw the end of the Sylvester McCoy era. McCoy was replaced by Richard Griffiths, but that wasn't the only change that happened during the course of that season. The show's longest serving producer John Nathan Turner had left, and been replaced by former production manager Ian Fraser. Script editor Andrew Cartmel had also left and been replaced by Colin Brake. Meanwhile, Sophie Aldred's ace had been replaced by a new companion called Rain Cunningham, played by Julia Swahala. The show's theme tune had also been changed to what we would know as the Distant J theme. Season 27 had also seen the introduction of a new recurring character, in the form of Rain's father, Sam Cunningham, played by Tom Georgeson. I understand that most of you will have already watched the Season 27 video a million times by this point, but I thought I'd give a quick recap of it anyway, just to set the scene and quickly touch on what things will be important to remember for the rest of this series. So let's now get on with Season 28 itself. Chapter 2, A Brand New Era. After spending the previous season being mentored by their predecessors in a transitional state, Ian Fraser and Colin Brake would finally be able to fully realise their vision for the show. But what kind of vision would that be? Would they wish to continue where J&T and Andrew Cartmel had left off, or would they want to go down a very different path for the show? Well, I'm going to go with them deciding to carry on what the previous era had set up. But I don't think they just continue what the past few years have been trying to do. I think Fraser and Brake would make a real effort to do their own spin on the Cartmel master plan, and specifically the Doctor's manipulative nature. Obviously, the 7th Doctor had fancied himself as this Machiavellian arch-manipulator, who saw any opportunity to play chess with people's lives and emotions. He had that softer, more gentle side that we would expect from the Doctor, of course, but he wasn't above manipulating and twisting people and their emotions if it meant he could defeat an enemy. But I could imagine Richard Griffiths' 8th Doctor being quite different. He'd still be Machiavellian and cunning when the situation called for it, but he would only do it as a last resort. He would be much more aware of how such behaviour would make his friends feel, and so would be very weary and reluctant to act like that. He could remember how badly he had treated Ace at times, and whilst he rationalised it all to himself at the time by saying how it was all for the greater good, he would look back on it with regret. He would have realised that he should have let Ace decide her own path, rather than twist her arm into one he had already planned for her. I don't believe I did a good enough job in exploring all of this in my Season 27 video, so I'm trying to make up for it now, as you can probably tell. With a new Doctor, there would obviously be a new costume. The new 8th Doctor would wear fancy morning suits. There would be a few variations, mainly in the colours of the jacket and waistcoat, alternating between red, blue and purple. A silk scarf would also be added, with its colour also alternating between red, green and blue. This costume would be the first in a very long while to completely move away from the question marks that had been such a staple for the Doctors during J&T's era. Sylvester McCoy's costume for Season 27 had obviously moved away from the question marks already, but this would be the first time a Doctor would have never worn them since 1980. I want to thank one of my graphic designers, BillyBob, for these great edits he did of Griffiths in the costume I had in mind. Anyway, I think Ian Fraser and Colin Brake would also want to lean into the much darker tone seen in some of the previous stories, especially the likes of The Curse of Fenric and Elixion. They wouldn't want to go too overboard with it, as they would know how much of a backlash it would get from some viewers and BBC high-ups. So I don't think they'd want to have any really violent scenes or anything like that. But I think they would continue to push the show into slightly more mature themes. They would reason that since the show was nearly 30 years old by that point, it would make sense to go with a more sophisticated style of storytelling, in their opinion anyway. So a lot of stories would focus on exploring the dark side of humanity, an area which, as DWM issue 255 says, it could inhabit without fear of comparison with blockbuster science fiction films. Another change would be made to the opening titles. The Cal video titles would be kept mostly the same, albeit with Griffiths' face now included instead of McCoy's obviously, and the whole sequence would have a sort of green tint to it, just to make it stand out from the McCoy era titles more. A skull would also be added to the title sequence, with Griffiths' face merging into it. This had actually been part of the original idea for McCoy's title sequence, but hadn't ended up in the final version, so it's not impossible that they could have included it in Griffiths' title sequence. I know that one of my most recent what ifs ran into a bit of controversy for having a similar idea for its title sequence. Many of you understandably pointed out that having a skull appear after Patrick Troughton's face for a title sequence that would have aired after he'd died would be very disrespectful, and I just want to apologise again for that mistake. Neither me nor the person who designs the sequence for that video meant any offence. We honestly didn't realise that it could be interpreted like that until some of you started pointing it out. The idea to do it came about after I had asked for the same thing to be included in the Richard Griffiths titles for this video. But again, we're not trying to disrespect the dead, as obviously Richard Griffiths sadly passed away 11 years ago from when this video was made. It's just that the skull has been used a lot for the various alternate timelines that other fans have come up with based on this premise over the years, and I thought that it would make sense to include it as part of the titles for this video because of this. But I understand if some of you still aren't that keen on it, but I honestly wasn't trying to offend anyone. I'm sorry if it felt like that. Hello, Future Bill here. I've just realised whilst editing this that I forgot to mention who had designed the title sequence that I'd used. So the original version was created by one of my graphic designers, BillyBob. But after one of you very kindly suggested that I change the face animation in that title sequence when I used it for my season 28 teaser, one of that person kind of linked to a video by Mergenman4 where he did something pretty similar, basically a Richard Griffiths version of the Cowl video title sequence. So I reached out to him on Discord, and he was more than happy for me to use that face animation from his own video. So thank you very much to both Mergenman4 for the updated face animation, as well as to BillyBob for the rest of the title sequence. Anyway, the show's logo would also be changed to a design created by Paul Viz, which he had made for issue 255 of Doctor Who magazine in our timeline. I also want to make a change to what I said in my season 27 video, specifically with what I said about the new TARDIS interior. Instead of the more traditional version of Mike Tucker's season 27 design that I originally went with, I'm going to now go with the design seen in the 7th Doctor DWM comics that also tied into the Virgin New Adventures books, and that one was created by Lee Sullivan. And I'd also have the police box exterior redesigned to be the one seen in the 30th anniversary documentary, 30 Years in the TARDIS. Thanks to Grackle for these great renders of them. So yeah, just imagine that's what I'd gone with for my season 27 video. Anyway, now that that's all sorted, let's take a look at the stories that would have made up season 28. Chapter 3. The stories themselves. As had been the case since season 23, season 28 will be made up of 14 25-minute long episodes, which would make up 4 stories. These would have been: Number 1, The Last of the Daleks by Ben Aronovich. Synopsis. The TARDIS materialises on the barren planet Statio. The Doctor is still recovering from his regeneration, so it's up to Rain to figure out why the TARDIS has brought them there. It isn't long until she and a now recovered Doctor come face to face with a very old and deadly enemy, the Daleks. Overview. The Last of the Daleks would start season 28 off with a familiar, well-established feeling. Obviously, the Daleks would come back 3 years after their last appearance in Remembrance of the Daleks. The Daleks themselves would be the Imperial faction, having been victorious in their civil war against the Renegades. But this would come at a terrible cost for the Imperials. They would now be mostly reduced to a handful of surviving colonies and outposts, with their home planet Skaro having been destroyed in remembrance, obviously. Statio would be one of these last outposts, hence the Last of the Daleks title. The Imperial Daleks would have this vibe of being desperate scavengers, trying to maintain the last vestiges of an empire that was rapidly crumbling to dust. Despite this, the Imperial Daleks stationed on Statio wouldn't be sat idly on their metaphorical backsides. They would be using the local humanoid population as slave labour, converting some of them into Robomen to keep the others in order. Davros will be leading the operation with the help of a Supreme Dalek, which we'll get to in a bit. Davros would confront the Doctor for having tricked him into destroying Skaro, but Davros would frame it in such a way as to suggest the Doctor destroyed the planet himself, which would shock Rain and cause the Doctor to feel guilt and shame for his past self's actions. This would all come to a head at the end of the story, with the Doctor and Rain discussing the Seventh Doctor's slightly cavalier and manipulative nature. The Doctor would make a promise to Rain, as well as himself, that he would stop seeing everything and everyone as a chessboard, and think more about the consequences of his actions. The Doctor would obviously spend much of the first episode recovering from his regeneration. He would be unsure about his identity, but would recover in time to follow Rain to the Daleks' headquarters. This would lead into a memorable cliffhanger for episode 1, where the Daleks would surround them and bark, "Exterminate the intruders! Exterminate them! Exterminate! Exterminate!" As for the Supreme Dalek, he would have an all-new colour scheme of black and gold for this story, although still being an Imperial-styled Dalek. And I have to thank Grackle again for coming up with this great render of the Supreme. I know it looks similar to one that the Prydonium made, but that's only because we share the same inspiration, which was a Dapol Dalek figure released back in the 1990s. I know I could have gone with another colour scheme, but I felt like this one was the most suitable for the character. But please don't think that I'm trying to copy the Prydonian. I even made a conscious effort to not use any of his pictures of the design. The Doctor would comment on how ironic it was that Davros had spent years fighting against another Supreme Dalek, the leader of the Renegade faction, only for him to eventually create his own. Davros would explain that he merely recognised the value of having a second in command, and that he'd genetically engineered the new Supreme to be completely loyal to him, like he'd done with some Daleks in Resurrection of the Daleks, which is what helped to kick off the Imperial Renegades Dalek Civil War in the first place. Davros would also allude to how this Supreme wasn't the first he'd had, but refused to tell the Doctor what he meant by this. Speaking of Davros, he would also undergo a slight redesign for this story. Gone was his restrictive Emperor Dalek look from Remembrance, and he was now back to a more traditional look for him, with the Imperial styled base from his Remembrance look now more visible, and with a mechanical claw attached to the arm that got shot off by the Squire of Knight Orsini Bostock in Revelation of the Daleks. In terms of the audience reception to this story, fans would be delighted to see the Daleks again, and for the story to clearly follow on from Remembrance of the Daleks, and explain what had happened to Davros and both Dalek factions since then. Ben Aronovich would later look back on this story and say that maybe he shouldn't have started off a new era with so much continuity. But casual viewers didn't seem to mind this, as the story would still get pretty good ratings. Ian Fraser had decided to bring the Daleks back for the new Doctor's first story, so as to hopefully gain a bit more public interest and publicity, and this would actually work. Viewers would also appreciate the discussion about the Seventh Doctor's actions and morality and see it as a sign that the show really was growing up and challenging both the characters and the audience more. Overall, The Last of the Daleks would go down as a great start to the Richard Griffiths era, with it being considered one of the best first stories for a new Doctor by fans. Number 2. Night Thoughts by Edward Young. Synopsis. A remote Scottish mansion. 5 bickering academics are haunted by ghosts from their past. Reluctantly, they offer shelter to the Doctor and his companion, Rain. Rain, already troubled by a vivid nightmare, is further disturbed by the nighttime appearance of a whistling, hooded apparition. The Doctor tries to befriend the young housemaid, Sue. Sue knows secrets. She knows why the academics have assembled here, and she knows why they are all so afraid. But Sue's lips are sealed. She prefers to communicate through her disturbing toy, Happy the Rabbit. And then the killing begins. Gruesome deaths that leads the Doctor and Rain to discover the grisly truth behind the academics' plans, and as the ghosts of the past become ghosts of the present, to recognise that sometimes death can be preferable to life. Overview. Whereas The Last of the Daleks had largely stuck to the show's traditions, Night Thoughts would be the first to really explore the new direction Ian Fraser and Colin Brake wanted to take the show in. There wouldn't be any fantastical sci-fi aliens in this story, just a haunted house full of terrified scientists, with one of them being a murderer. But who exactly would remain a mystery for most of the story. The Doctor and Rain would put their detective skills to the test to try and figure out who was behind it all. There would be this whole claustrophobic and enclosed feeling to the story. There would only be a few guest characters for the Doctor and Rain to interact with, and there would be this dark sense of deep regrets and hidden secrets running throughout the story. In Part 3, answers would finally be given as to what was going on. The 5 scientists, Major Dickens, Joe Hartley, Dr. O'Neill, the Deacon and the Bursar, had taken a life 10 years previously. They had mistakenly diagnosed a young girl called Edie with a fatal illness from the chemical weapons that had been tested on the islands they were all on. They thought that if they euthanized her, they would be sparing her from a horrible death. But in reality, she only had an eye infection. They hadn't realised this until it was too late. This would all ultimately be proven to be part of an elaborate plan by Major Dickens. The Bursar had come up with a theory of how to send a message back in time, and they had all wanted to test it. Dickens decided to convince the others that Edie's condition was terminal, so that he could have a perfect moment to truly test out the theory. He knew that with the Bursar's device, he would one day be able to send a message back in time, supposedly telling his past self to stop the operation. But in reality, he knew how his own mind worked, and knew that his past self would be more determined to go through with it if he was told not to. In the meantime, whilst the Major waited to send the message back in time, he traps the others at the mansion, and made them work with him so that his plan would succeed. He made them believe that it was so they could one day undo their mistake. Edie's mother had seen the way Hartley, who was a taxidermist, had reacted after removing her daughter's eyes, after she died. He seemed so proud of his handiwork, and it drove Edie's mother to kill herself. She was presumed to have drowned, as was her other daughter, Ruth, but it would be revealed that Sue was in fact Ruth, and that Dr. O'Neill was her father, who had come to the mansion to find out once and for all what had happened to his wife and daughters. Edie would come back to life thanks to the device. Dickens would explain that her body had been perfectly preserved by Hartley. He says that whilst they did bury a grave, it was in fact empty, and he didn't know where Hartley had hidden the body. The Doctor decides to take matters into his own hands and uses the TARDIS to go back in time to when Edie died. Dickens's message comes through, but the Doctor convinces everyone to ignore it. He then suggests killing Edie, so as to keep the timeline intact. Back in the present, Rain and the Bursar have been locked up in the cellar by Dickens, but they're not alone. A giant stuffed bear is also down there, and it starts to move by itself and shuffle towards them. Rain and the Bursar suspects that it is Edie, and the Bursar begs for forgiveness before the bear falls on her, killing her. Rain discovers that no one is inside the bear, however, and is left confused. She then manages to escape the cellar and confronts Dickens, tying him to his own operating table that he used on Edie all those years ago. The Doctor arrives back at the mansion and tells Rain about how he went back in time to ensure that events still play out the same. But he then admits to her that he couldn't bring himself to kill Edie. The Doctor then realises that when he and Rain first arrived, the others had been conducting an experiment. They had thought that they'd failed, but maybe they didn't. Maybe Edie was briefly brought back to life then. Maybe she had just enough time to escape the bear and overhear how to keep resending the messages, to extend her short return to life. And maybe she developed a burning desire for revenge. Back at the mansion, Major Dickens is still tied up to the operating table. He hears someone come in and thinks it's the police, but it isn't. His face turns to one of pure shock and sheer horror when he sees who it is, although we only see his reactions, never the visitor themselves. The unseen visitor is holding Sue's Happy the Rabbit soft toy, and a pair of very sharp shears. Dickens begs them not to hurt him, but to no avail. The screen fades to black as we hear Dickens shouting, "No, not my eyes!" And then the credits roll. So yeah, a pretty dark story overall. I suspect there would be a few complaints from some viewers and BBC high-ups to this story, with them believing it to not be suitable for children. But Ian Fraser and Colin Brake would defend the story's darker and more mature themes by saying how they were only trying to explore new ideas for the show. Despite all of this, Night Thoughts would be pretty well liked among most of the audience. While some were complaining about the show's more mature themes, others were actually praising them. And despite some of the BBC high-ups not being completely happy with the show's new direction, nothing was really done about it yet. Night Thoughts would go down as a really great and sinister story among the fan community, seeing as how it was the first story to really explore the new darker side of humanity direction. It would become the example to which all other stories of that type will be measured against for the next few years. Number 3, Illegal Alien by Mike Tucker and Robert Parry. Synopsis. Britain is at war. Night after night, the Luftwaffe are bombing London. A serial killer dubbed the Limehouse Lurker is stalking the rubble-strewn streets. But a deadlier threat falls from the sky in the shape of a sinister silver sphere. Cody McBride, expat American private eye, sees the sphere crash land and split open, and glimpses something emerging from within. But the military dismiss his account of events. The sphere is simply a new German secret weapon that has malfunctioned in some way. What else could it be? Arriving amidst the chaos, the Doctor and Rain are the only people to believe McBride. The sphere bears all the hallmarks of sophisticated alien technology, and whatever was inside it is now loose in London. Before long, they have embarked on a trail that brings them face to face with hidden Nazi operatives and some very old enemies. Overview. Just like how the last of the Daleks had seen the return of some old enemies of the Doctor's, so would Illegal Alien. And this time it would, of course, be the Cybermen. Just like the Daleks' last appearance, the Cybermen had last appeared 3 years before, during Season 25 in Silver Nemesis. But Illegal Alien wouldn't serve as a direct sequel to Silver Nemesis, like the last of the Daleks had done for Remembrance of the Daleks. Instead, it would be mostly its own separate Cyberman story, but with a few tie-ins to other past Cyberman stories, which we'll get to in a bit. As the synopsis teased, the Doctor and Rain would find themselves right in the middle of the London Blitz. Teaming up with the aforementioned Cody McBride, they would stumble upon some cyber technology that had crashed to the Earth. They would then meet a retired civil servant named George Lim, who wishes to find a serial killer called the Limehouse Lurker, who would turn out to be a damaged cyber leader. The Doctor and McBride would then meet a police inspector, Mullen. The three of them would then investigate a technical company called Peddler Electronics, whose CEO, the sinister Mr. Wall, is allied with the Cybermen. Meanwhile, Rain is kidnapped by some Nazi spies and taken to Nazi-occupied Jersey. She discovers the Lemur compound, which houses thousands of dormant Cybermen. SS Captain Hartman attacks the Cybermen after they refuse to enter into an alliance with him. The Doctor reprograms a cyber leader that is damaged in the crossfire and sets it to explode. While Lim makes for the damaged cyber time machine, the Doctor, in the briefly frozen time, manages to pull Rain back to the TARDIS. Back in London, Mullen and McBride find another dormant cyber army in the London sewers. For Illegal Alien, plans would be drawn up by Mike Tucker to completely redesign the Cybermen. Unfortunately, these plans would prove to be too costly to make on the show's limited budget, although Ian Fraser would be very impressed with them and tell Tucker that they will try to get the money together to make them at some point. In the meantime, they would reuse the costumes from Silver Nemesis. Whilst the look of them was arguably starting to look a bit dated by 1991, there wouldn't be that much the production team could do about it for the time being. As I teased earlier, Illegal Alien would tie into an earlier Cyberman story, that being the Invasion, with the cyber army that Mullen and McBride discover at the end of the story being one that's waiting to be activated for the events of that story. So essentially, Illegal Alien would serve as a prequel to the Invasion. Fans would be pretty happy with Illegal Alien. They would like how it wasn't trying to juggle too many different ideas at once like Silver Nemesis had done, and they would feel like it had redeemed the Cybermen a bit, after the way general fan perception had regarded their stuff in Silver Nemesis 3 years prior, and they liked the references to past Cyberman stories. Viewers also liked the World War II setting and felt like the production team did a decent job in trying to recreate that era, even if it would result in the story coming dangerously close to going over budget. Overall reception to this story would be pretty positive, although due to how well regarded the season had been so far, Illegal Alien would be overshadowed a little by the stories that came right before it. Number 4. Blood and Iron by Andrew Cartmel. Synopsis. Margrave University in 2001, and Rain is enjoying her first trip into the Earth's future. But there's a strange new drug on the street. It's called Warlock, and some people say it's the creation of the devil. Others see it as the gateway to enlightenment. For the Doctor, there are mysteries to solve. Why are there animals imprisoned in the science labs? And what are the true motives of the student Scobie and his followers? With enemies on all sides, the Doctor teams up with his old friend Brigadier Bambera and the forces of UNIT in a battle for the future of the whole world. Overview. As the synopsis teased, Blood and Iron would be another story to feature the return of something from the show's past. But this time, instead of it being an old enemy, it would be an old ally of the Doctor's, namely Brigadier Bambera, who was introduced in Season 26's Battlefield. She'd still be in charge of UNIT and wouldn't have to worry about sharing a mission with a certain other Brigadier this time around. Angela Bruce would play her with the usual sarcastic, exasperated wit, and Bambera would shrug off the Doctor's change of face, no doubt with some kind of sardonic comment. Former script editor Andrew Cartmel would come back to the show to write another story of his own. Colin Brake would ask him to resurrect a story idea Cartmel would come up with for season 27, and one which Cartmel had been contemplating as having for Sylvester McCoy's last story, before eventually deciding on Robin Mukherjee's Elixion instead. This, of course, would be Blood and Iron. I should mention how Blood and Iron is the correct title for what is more commonly known as Animal. The latter was made up by Dave Owens for his What If article in issue 255 of Doctor Who magazine, which is the same issue I'm using as a resource for this video. Blood and Iron would be another dark story. It would deal with themes of animal experimentation, drug use, and animal rights activism. The Doctor and Rain would meet up with Rain's father, Sam, and stay with him for a while. Whilst there, Rain would be visited by some old friends of hers from school, Jack and Shell. They would talk about how they have become animal rights activists and convince Rain to come to a meeting to discuss Margrave University, which is carrying out terrible experiments on defenceless animals. The Doctor and Sam would search for Rain and end up bumping into Brigadier Bambera and some UNIT soldiers. Bambera tells them how UNIT is investigating rumours of cruel experiments on animals and how they are supposedly linked to a series of grisly murders caused by a new street drug, Warlock. Jack, Shell and Rain arrive at the meeting, and Rain is introduced to their leader, Raymond W. Scobie. Rain asks Scobie what Jack and Shell meant about Margrave University, and Scobie explains how he and the others were once students there. They were all friends with another student called Harry, but one day Harry went missing and didn't show up to any of his classes. They phoned his parents, but they said that they hadn't seen him either. Worried for their friend's safety, they got in touch with the police, and an Inspector Cole came to the university to ask them all some questions. He then spoke to the staff, and one of them, the head of chemistry, Professor Rogers, said that he'd spoken to Harry the night before in his laboratory. Inspector Cole asked to have a look at the lab, and Professor Rogers took him inside, where he too was never seen or heard from again. After a few days, Scobie and the others decided to get to the bottom of this once and for all, and broke into the lab. They discovered that Professor Rogers had been conducting highly immoral experiments on animals, and using the results to make a new street drug called Warlock. The professor then tried using humans for the drug, starting with Harry and Inspector Cole. Scobie and the others tried to stop Professor Rogers, first by confronting him and then trying to convince the university's chancellor to shut the experiments down and sack the professor. But the chancellor refused and seemed to be under some kind of mind control. Scobie and the others got in touch with the police again, but they also seemed to be under mind control and said that they didn't even know who Inspector Cole was. Convinced that this is all part of some kind of conspiracy involving Professor Rogers, Scobie and the others leave the university and set up their own activist group to try and fight back against the experiments. Scobie then tells Rain that she has a choice. She can either join them in stopping the experiments or oppose them and be left to the mercies of Professor Rogers. Rain agrees to join them on a raid of the laboratory, but this raid is interrupted by the Doctor, Sam and Bambera, who have arrived at the university to conduct their own investigation. The Doctor listens to what Scobie has to say and says that he sympathises with what they're trying to do. The Doctor wonders about the mind-controlled university staff and police and sets up a meeting with the university's Chancellor. During their meeting, the Doctor notices that the Chancellor does indeed seem to be under some kind of influence, and is surprised by how quickly he brushes off Scobie's accusations. After some more investigating, the Doctor stumbles on the culprits behind everything. It would be none other than some old enemies of the Doctor's, the Metatraxi. The Doctor would ask them why they were doing this. The Metatraxi attack unit's leader would explain how they had wanted to find out more about humans and the other life forms that live on Earth, after their last encounters with them in both Bad Destination and Action at a Distance. They had been helped in their efforts by another old friend of the Doctor's, who had conducted the experiments for the Metatraxi, since they still had their inability to injure any life form which wasn't armed. This mysterious old friend had also showed them how to hypnotise the university staff and police officers. Once this unknown ally of the Metatraxis had left, Professor Rogers took over the experiments and decided to use them to make the Warlock drug. Rogers would then explain how he'd done this so as to rekindle mankind's savage past, and also that he could monitor the effects such a drug would have on the human mind, in case such information might come in useful for the Metatraxi. The Doctor would be horrified by all of this and denounce Professor Rogers as being nothing more than the stereotypical mad scientist, in a heated exchange between the two. Rogers would throw the Doctor and Rain into a small storeroom and leave them at the mercy of some of the animals he's experimented on. The Doctor would be able to save himself and Rain by telepathically communicating with the animals. This particular moment would go down in infamy among some fans, as they felt like it was just too silly and turned the Doctor into some kind of superhero. They would say that Cartmel's original version, where the Doctor took a pill of Warlock in order to communicate with the animals, would have worked a lot better. although this had been rejected by Ian Fraser for going one step too far with the mature nature of the storytelling. Anyway, Blood and Iron would end with Scobie and the other former students blowing up Margrave University. They would justify that they were doing it as revenge for what Professor Rogers and the Metatraxi had done to Harry. They would all be restrained by Brigadier Bambera and her unit soldiers, but not before Scobie had tried to explain why he'd done it to the Doctor, saying, "We did it for our friend. Don't you understand that, Doctor?" The Doctor would respond that he did understand, but that vengeance was never the right thing to do. Scobie and the other activists would then be taken away, with the Doctor and Rain making their farewells to Bambera and Sam. As they walk back to the TARDIS, Rain would ask the Doctor who the Metatraxi's unknown ally could be. The Doctor would pause in thought for a moment, and then say, "Oh, I suspect we'll find out soon enough." Obviously, this was all to tease the Master's return, something which didn't go unnoticed by fans at the time. Many would be left wondering when exactly the Master would next be seen, and we'll come back to all of that in a future video. In the meantime, Blood and Iron would also go down fairly well. Not as well as the rest of the season had gone, but that was more because of just how much both fans and general viewers had enjoyed the previous 3 stories. Fans would be delighted to see both Brigadier Bambera and the Metatraxi come back, as well as for Andrew Cartmell's return to the show, even if it was not too long after he'd finished as its script editor. The themes that the story explored were again criticised by some viewers as too dark, but overall most people thought it made for a good, action-packed and thoughtful final story to end the season on. I know that I probably should have stuck closer to what Andrew Cartmell did for the Big Finish audio adaptation of the story, called Animal, but I and my production team felt like it was better for me to try something new, while still using the basic elements of the storyline. I hope that no one minds this, although it's absolutely fair enough if you'd have preferred me to have stuck more to the audio. Just before we wrap things up for this chapter, I just want to quickly talk about the amount of episodes there would have been for each story. So The Last of the Daleks and Night Thoughts would both have 4 25-minute long episodes, whilst Illegal Alien and Blood and Iron would each have 3 25-minute long episodes. Chapter 4. What next? With season 28 having gone down pretty well, the BBC high-ups were left with no other option than to reluctantly renew the show for another season. The show's production team were all very happy with this news, and Ian Fraser and Colin Brake eagerly started production on season 29. Season 28 had seen the show starting to climb back up the ratings, despite still facing tough competition from Coronation Street, with the 2 shows still airing in the same time slot as each other. Peter Cushing's decision to give Ian Fraser and Colin Brake their own full season had paid off, as had Fraser's and Brake's bold decision to take the show in a new and more mature direction. And as much as Jonathan Powell still absolutely loathes the programme, even he agreed that there was little point in cancelling the show when it was starting to gain popularity once again with viewers. So season 28 had ensured that the Richard Griffiths era would get off to a pretty good start, as well as ensuring the show's short-term survival. But with the BBC high-ups still not caring about the show, to the extent that they'd not even increased the show's budget for the past few years, Fraser, Brake and the rest of the show's production team would still face a few challenges with season 29, which we'll come back to next time. Chapter 5. Closing remarks, aka why did this video take so long to get made? So that was season 28. I hope you all enjoyed it. I'm really sorry that it took me nearly 9 months to upload this video. That definitely wasn't the original plan, I can assure you. I've been through quite a lot in my personal life during that time. We had a death in our family which really hit me. I started back at college after being out of education for a couple of years, and I've now started the process of moving out of my current flat. So yeah, a pretty demanding and eventful year for me. Combine all of that with all the other what ifs and general videos I've made, as well as spending time with family and friends, and that's why I've taken so long to make this video. With college slowly dying down now for the summer, I'm hoping that things will be a lot less hectic for the next few months. So I should hopefully be able to get season 29 out sometime between July and September. But if any issues crop up in the meantime, then I'll make sure to keep you all informed. But what's next for the other what if videos? Well, I'm planning on the very next what if video being one all about what if the 1985 hiatus never happened. You might have to wait until the end of this month for that one to come out, as I might be quite busy moving home in the meantime. After that, I'll be doing another what if scenario where a different actor played one of the Doctors, similar to my Capaldi 8th Doctor video. I set up a poll on both my YouTube community tab and my What If Discord server to ask you all which one should be next, and the winner was one imagining either Graham Crowden or Bernard Cribbins as the 4th Doctor. I then did a separate poll for you to vote on which actor you think would work best out of Crowden or Cribbins. And as of the time of writing, which is the 4th of May, it looks like most of you want to see Bernard Cribbins as the 4th Doctor, at least on the YouTube poll anyway. But on the Discord poll, people seem to be leaning more towards Graham Crowden, so I might just tackle both in the video, but we'll have to wait and see about that. And since the Hugh Grant as the 9th Doctor option was the runner-up out of the other options on those original polls, I will do that one sometime soon as well. And I'll probably do all the other options eventually. Then I should hopefully have more time to do what ifs, as well as other videos, I should say, during the summer. I'll be doing a lot of the most requested scenarios, such as what if Jodie Whittaker had stayed for 60th specials, and what if Matt Smith was in Journey's End. And obviously season 29 will come out sometime during the summer as well, hopefully. So yeah, things may have got off to a rocky start with this channel for this year, but I should be able to make more videos more often from June till September. Anyway, so thanks for watching, I hope you all enjoyed it. Please don't forget to press that subscribe button below, as well as press the bell icon at the side of it, so that you'll stay notified of when all my new videos come out. This channel currently has 1,960 subscribers as of the time of writing and recording this video, but if we can get to 2,500 by the end of this year, then I'll do another Q&A where you can ask me whatever questions you want. Just keep them polite, please. Also, please rate and comment below your thoughts on the scenario I came up with for season 28. And please feel free to donate to my Ko-fi page, link in the description, or send me a YouTube super thanks below, if you want to, of course. And I shall see you all in another video. So, until next time, bye bye!